Good evening, members. It's now 6:30, so we'll start tonight's scrutiny committee. I'll just read out the housekeeping rules. There is no fire alarm scheduled for this evening, therefore if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately following the fire exits. The fire exit is located at the side of the room, and we can exit through reception and meet in the War Memorial Park. This evening's meeting will be webcast. So the meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available to view on YouTube after the meeting. And please make sure your mobile phones are switched off or turned to silent. So my name is Jack Grounds. I'm the Democratic and Electoral Services Manager at the Council. The Chair has sent his apologies for this evening. So we are due to appoint a Vice Chair tonight. So we will take item number 4 on the agenda first to appoint the Vice Chair. Do we have any other proposals?
Can I propose Councillor McIntyre?
And is that seconded? From Councillor Fox, lovely. Those in favour of Councillor Tustain? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And all those in favour of Councillor McIntyre? That's 4. So Councillor Tustain is appointed as Vice Chair for the committee. If you'd like to take the chair.
Sorry, point of order, just for clarification, I thought the Scrutiny Committee was meant to have a member of opposition as chair of Scrutiny.
We are opposition. Labour members are not part of the...
I don't think that goes with the spirit of what we're trying to do, effective scrutiny, but obviously Council has spoken.
Sorry, just to pick that point up, obviously it's the Vice Chair position, but I accept what you're saying, that in normal circumstances the Chair would obviously be a Chair of Opposition, but as we just clarified, the Labour Group are not part of the coalition.
Right, thank you, and thank you for that support. And don't worry, Councillor McIntyre, we will have good scrutiny here. So moving on to item 5, which is minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of March. Or do we need to go back? Do we need to go back to item 1? Right, okay. I haven't been briefed, so it's all right. Right, back to item 1. Are there any apologies for absence and substitutions? I believe we have Councillor Miller.
I think I'm substituting for Councillor Durant.
I'm substituting for Councillor Miller.
Okay, any declarations of interest?
Unless the fact that, as the previous cabinet member, I am named on many of the performance report items, which isn't a sort of conflict of interest, but it is a bit of a strange thing. So I'll just mention it. Thank you.
I must declare similar that held the post as a cabinet member for planning and infrastructure. So there will be key performance indicators that could be against my name.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, moving on to item 5, minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of March. Do we believe they're a true record? Oh, sorry. I should be looking at this. This is like a briefing, right? Sorry about that. Urgent matters. To consider any items of business other than those shown on this agenda, which by reason of special circumstances to be stated at the meeting, in the opinion of the chairman, should be considered at the meeting as a matter of urgency. Any urgent matters? Okay, right. Okay, so moving on to item 5. We'll get there. So, are the committee happy that the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of March are an accurate record? Is that agreed? Okay, thank you. Right, item 6. The quarter 4 2022-23 key indicator performance management report. So Kate Sallis is going to introduce the paper.
Thank you. Good evening. So the briefing paper in front of you, submitted for scrutiny, summarises the final outturn for quarter 4 of 22-23. For the measures in place for this monitoring period, I would like to add that in February 2022, Cabinet agreed the set of measures which will be monitored going forward. So these are the close of this set of measures being monitored. Thank you.
Thank you. So are there any questions to the officers? To Kate. Councillor Basham.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the whole KPI paper, it's very useful. Thank you. I believe, was this a new exercise last year?
No, it has been done previously, but this format and putting everything in the one paper rather than a separate report with the document is a new approach.
I had a few questions, and they related to how some of the items are measured. Obviously, overall, loads of green on the paper, which is really good and reassuring. And then I sort of naturally focus in on the areas that would be of interest to me or that I would have some personal experience of. So apologies if I don't comment on some of the other ambers and reds, but with regards to the debt collection KPIs, I'm going to have to find which page they're on. FFDO6. Page 16, thank you. Yeah, FFDO6 and FFDO7. Where we have percentage collections of debt collection rates, is that measured as a percentage of the number of debts that were outstanding that were collected, or a percentage of the pounds that were outstanding that were collected? I'd normally expect to see debtor days as a more appropriate measure of how quickly we're collecting our debts.
So it's actually percentage of debts in pounds value in terms of how much have we collected in terms of outstanding debt. Again, in terms of these indicators, these are the corporate indicators that support the council plan. There are service indicators that form part of service plans that look at further detail that sit below these. What we've agreed is that we will put that updated information on the members hub, so if members wish to see the more detailed stuff that supports the delivery of the services, as opposed to those indicators that have been agreed for the council plan, they are more than welcome to see those things.
Councillor Ganesh.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is not a question, it's just a comment on page 3, PFB 01. If we look through the last sort of 4-quarter results, you would see the performance sort of decline from 80-82 to 77 to 76. But it would be ideal to measure the like-for-like quarters than the overall year indicators. Page 13, PFB 01.
So These are the 22-23 indicators, and therefore they're just a factual position based on the indicators for last year. In February just gone, Cabinet approved the 23-24 indicators and obviously went through a process of receiving feedback and comments from Scrutiny Committee in terms of thoughts around what those indicators should be. That was responded to by the Leader of the Council at the time in terms of what those indicators will be for 23-24, and there'll be a similar process throughout the coming months, which will give you the opportunity to feed into the indicators that will be set for the next financial year. So there will be an opportunity either through scrutiny or performance panel, which is a later agenda item, to feedback thoughts in terms of what might be more useful, and then the new Leader of the Council will comment on those indicators in terms of what gets put forward for approval.
Thank you. It's just a matter of how it's displayed, so it'll be easier to compare quarter 4 to quarter 4 rather than financial year to a quarter 4. So if there will be an opportunity to do that, that'll be great. Thank you.
We are actually looking at how it's formatted and the ease of reading and the general direction of travel, so I'll take that on board. Thank you.
Councillor Bean.
So it was kind of a question / comment just on the point there by Sue. Obviously, we should constantly be challenging ourselves around the KPIs that we've set. Are they right? Should we be adapting them, etc.? So having looked at them right now, I'm looking at one particular KPI. I think it's SCC01, and I've got a comment, I guess, around the way in which we're structuring that KPI and a way in which we could do it differently. I'm just mindful of what you've said, Sue, around there'll be opportunities to feed into that, but some of the feed-in can be quite ad hoc based on what you're seeing at a moment in time. So I just want to clarify, there's a comment that I would want to make today because I'm seeing something today. I wouldn't want to be discouraged from making that point today because I might not remember that in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. So I just want to clarify in terms of capturing comments around the KPIs as we go along.
So again, the KPIs for 23-24 that we're monitoring going forward are different to these KPIs. So you're very welcome to make comments on these KPIs, but these are not the KPIs that we'll be monitoring going forward. So by all means, make those comments. They'll be recorded in the notes as comments to either be picked up at some point by scrutiny or by performance panel.
Sorry. So I take the point, but so some of them I expect will still be there in 23-24. We might have reframed them a little bit. So I guess the comment that I might like to make around one of them, I can't remember the construct, but I imagine it's fairly similar. I don't think we'll have overhauled this KPI, but I do think there is a better way in which we might want to approach that one.
Councillor Harvey.
Just to reassure members, obviously 22-23 and 23-24 were set by the previous cabinet. Respect that, so they've been set. But I'm hearing what you're saying, so we'll capture that and we'll take that into account when this next set of KPIs are drafted that relate to the outcoming priorities, but also the council plan and the council business. So I hear what you're saying.
Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. ISBO 1 on page 12, it talks about percentage of respondents. How many respondents were there in the first place? Sorry, page 12, ISBO 1, percentage of respondents. Now we get percentages, but I've no idea what that refers to because there's no number.
I think this is linked to the resident survey, so we'll clarify that point for you in terms of how many respondents that we had.
Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you, yes. I appreciate that there's going to be some work going forward looking at performance indicators. For my sins, I do quite a lot of spreadsheets on a daily basis and quite a lot of RAG status as well. What I can't understand from this report that's here is where the range is for Amber. We have a target and there doesn't seem to be any documentation, any indication within that of how close to that target you get before it changes to amber compared to green. So I think that might be beneficial going forward, just as a comment for the report to make it easier reading. Thank you.
Councillor Phillimore.
Yes, Chair, thanks very much. I'd just like some clarification on this. Page 13, one at the top, ISE 01, which is about number of homeless households with dependent children placed into B&B during the quarter year to date. And the narrative tells me that the rate of increased use of bed and breakfast has continued to slow during the final quarter of the year. And then the two reds are of quarter 3 and quarter 4 are 22 and 30. Someone can clarify that.
It's the cumulative position. So the increase from quarter 1 to quarter was 9, then it was 10, and then it was 8. So it actually has started to slow.
Councillor Harvey.
No, thank you. I'm conscious of what Councillor Phillimore said. Just in terms of flagging up that particular KPI, and again, we're coming back to how we might change these looking forward. The complication with the bed and breakfast particular KPI relates to the context in which it's set. So COVID had a direct impact, I understand, on that figure in quite a dramatic way, because the standard and target got set in an unrealistic sense to how it would be normally. So that had a direct impact in terms of those figures. But in the sense of going forward, I'm understood by our housing colleagues that the nature of how they describe it as a widget, the idea of how you describe a particular figure, there will be a far more contextual piece that they are able to give us from that perspective of bed and breakfast for other members to see in their reports, and I think that's quite useful. But how we look at an individual figure, you're right, you pick it out, and it needs the context with it, without a shadow of a doubt.
Is it supplementary?
Yeah, just to say I'm happy with the clarification from Sue and the leader.
I think it was Councillor Basham next.
Thank you, Chair. Moving on to some of the HR KPIs. Obviously, it's not great to see some red around staff turnover and voluntary resignation in particular. I think that one's being addressed with the recent HR pay and benefits review, so I didn't plan to dwell on that. The one that concerns me a little more is the total work time lost due to sickness, where we're targeting 2% or 2.5%, and we're hitting 4.6, and then we talk about it being 2.1% above target, which of course it is if you take 1% from the other. Although of course if you take 1% as a percentage of the other, it's approximately 100% above target. Is anyone able to comment on that KPI in particular, and or what the council's plan is to do about that?
So I think the target was, I think as per some of the other targets that were linked to the achievement during COVID, because a lot of people were working from home, not obviously mixing with other people, not only were they not getting COVID, they weren't getting flus and coughs and things like that, and people perhaps weren't reporting their sickness in the same way, and therefore it was historic, for that period beforehand it was really, really low. So we definitely need to think about the target going forward, and in this particular scenario, target always feels like the wrong word, but a limit for all intents and purposes. I think we have in the main very good short-term sickness, but we do have a couple of individuals, members of staff, who are on very long-term sickness that obviously influences the statistics. So there is a massive piece of work around well-being, which is one of the key indicators in terms of one of the key issues why people are off sick. And there's a significant amount of work being undertaken with officers and a huge wellbeing programme to help try and address some of those things. But this is actually being skewed somewhat by a couple of very long-term ill health.
Thank you. It's not actually on this paper, but I think recalling from the HR committee and the stats we saw then, I believe we have something like an average of 12 sick days per person. I don't know what colleagues think, but I know in the private sector we'd expect something sub 8 or possibly even 4 to 5. I don't know if anyone else has got any views on that.
Councillor Ford.
Thanks, Chair. I think probably what would be helpful is if you had a comparison with other councils that of similar size and level, other district councils. I know when I questioned what I considered to be really high turnover and high voluntary leaving, I was given data which illustrated to me that although it was unusual in my experience of employment, it was not unusual for council. But I think it would be helpful to have that data.
So I'm happy to feed that back, and that can be a recommendation to HR committee for their update of their workforce report.
And I think it was Councillor Ganesh first, and then it'll be you, Councillor, whatever your name is. So it's an ongoing scrutiny joke. Oh, sorry, Councillor McIntyre was first. Yep, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. So this is another example of it could be worth comparing Q4 to Q4, the staff sickness, and because it is seasonal, and it would be ideal to include the suggestion that I made previously. The like-for-like comparison is probably what ideal. Thank you.
Yes, Karen.
It's a rolling programme, effectively, of 12 months. So it's the reason we don't compare like with like is because obviously it's, as you say, it is seasonal, but a whole raft of things can impact on that. So it is just an annual percentage. But we can certainly look to see whether there's any major comparative difference to see whether that would be an improved indicator for you.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, on the sickness, it'd be nice to know if there's an underlying problem we don't know about, whether it's one thing that's causing this. And I think that, which happens in workforces across everywhere, something happens within in the context of the firm or whatever, maybe work stress, things like that. It'd be nice as a committee, we'd know what that is, if that is a major factor.
So that, sorry, apologies. That information is reported to HR committee, so that information is already reported, and the sickness is broken down into the various reasons for sickness, the number of days lost for each of those types of sickness.
I knew that, but when you're looking at figures and when they're coming up, if there's one underlying factor that's coming up, even this committee, when we look at it, we think, oh, that's wrong. But if it can be pointed out what the underlying factor is, it then may make sense, if that makes sense.
Sorry, yes, we're happy to add that to the narrative of the indicator.
And I think, is it Councillor Harvey or Councillor McIntyre? Okay, Councillor McIntyre.
Thank you. So this one is PFB 04 on page 13. Number of planning appeals allowed lost. So this one's a little bit of a bone of contention for me because last year was my first year as a councillor, and I can remember being invited to a presentation in the chamber where we were left in no doubt as councillors that this council was at risk of having our planning decisions taken away from us because we looked like we were having our performance wasn't too good and a number of appeals being overturned. And then you look at this KPI and it's green across the board, but when you look at the text, it does talk about the quality of decision at the end. So again, I think this goes back to the what is amber, because this doesn't marry up to the scare story we were given in the chamber. So I think definitely that's most probably a performance indicator that just needs a little bit more finesse, so that if we are getting the message to councillors that perhaps we need to be a little bit more robust in our planning decisions, then that happens. But if we can also negate the scare stories, if they are scare stories, that would help as well. Thank you.
So I think at the point of time when that information was briefed, the council were looking to put further funding into the planning service in order to be able to address, firstly, a number of backlogged activity, but also identifying the fact that it's more about the fact that if we lose more than sort of 10% of our appeals, that also has a negative impact in terms of it highlights the council in terms of why you're having so many appeals overturned. So there's two different indicators here. One is how many were actually the backlog and how much we're getting through, and also the how many planning decisions are being overturned at appeal. So there was two different issues that the council was facing, and what this is now reflecting is that intervention in terms of additional resources and that ongoing budget provision so that continues is now having a positive effect, and actually we're now achieving the targets that we should be achieving. That will keep us outside of those particular sanctions.
Thanks for that explanation, but again, this is where I would expect to see, if we were running quite close to the wind, that our KPIs would have indicated that, with perhaps an amber through one of the quarters, which I'm not seeing. I don't get that from looking at that KPI, but I appreciate the explanation you gave and I accept it. Thank you.
I'm going to add my question at that point, because based on what Councillor McIntyre said, so you mentioned 10%, but if we've got a target here of about 33%, that sounds like that's not necessarily the right target then. So that's possibly, obviously it is green, it reflects where the targets are, but potentially that might be something where we need to look at that.
So I think if you looked at the previous year's performance indicators, that's where you would have seen the red and the amber. This particular additional resource has been in place for over 12 months now, so you're seeing the continuous position throughout 22-23, and this indicator relates to one of them. But because of the explanation that was given in terms of the briefing, I was just explaining there was a separate issue as well, which is not necessarily reflected here.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I think just to agree with Sue in terms of the direction on this one, I note that this was Cabinet's choice of the key KPI they wanted on this, which I respect because it was their choice. But you are right, there's two different things here. There's what we see as being both minors and majors combined into this appeal figure. And the major issue that you've rightly identified was what was raised, because it was the major applications that caused the concern with the government target. And it's the government's period of time, so they set the time, it's the government target, it's the government criteria, and that's of the concern, because that's where we're being held to account on that particular point, as you rightly say. Whether we should include it in here is a matter that we can take away, but the context, this is our KPI rather than the government's KPI, and that was set by the previous Cabinet.
So there is a fine line in terms of reporting that particular indicator. So let's say, for example, the council is at 9.5% before it tips over the 10%. We cannot in any way, shape or form give any aspect of predetermination in terms of appeals and, influence in terms of what that decision might be. So appreciating that it is just an indicator, it's actually quite a difficult indicator to report. That's not to say we can't provide that information, but it shouldn't be something that necessarily members are then commenting on in terms of DC committee's performance, if you like, in terms of how many appeals are being overturned.
Councillor Basham.
I'd just like to build on Councillor McIntyre's point about amber criteria. And I think my first comment I made was, it's a sea of green, which looks great. There are two other indicators on here which I had concerns about, and I was looking at them and thinking, well, they're amber really, and or red. One of them is FFB01, and they're both related to time bounds. So they're both sort of absolutes, but they've both been perhaps scored differently because of the time bounds. So if we look at FFB01, achievement of an unqualified audit opinion, yes, it's very true that we do expect to receive an unqualified audit opinion. However, it has been delayed, and it has been delayed because of some underlying issues with regards to property valuations, which were originally delayed and have been passing through audit committee for over 6 months. So I look at that one and I just think it's slightly disingenuous to mark it green, because I think it should be amber. The other one that I had a query on was FFE07, and again, it's a timing issue. FFEO 5, which is on page 17, end of year appraisal completion percentage. So we're targeting a certain completion of appraisals within a certain time frame. Now this one's just greyed out. It says our explanation is the year-end appraisal completion has been extended, and as such at present we're unable to report on this. Well, didn't we fail it then? Didn't we miss it? I'm sure there's good reasons for extending it. However, when I've been responsible for this KPI in other situations, one is expected, we have to deliver a certain number of appraisals by a certain time frame so that they're relevant to staff for the year and objective setting for the year ahead. So I'm pretty uncomfortable with that one being greyed out. I think, overall, I think we need to be tougher with ourselves.
Take the point on the audit opinion. Obviously it's actually because this is the 22-23, not 21-22 indicators. We do expect to have an unqualified, but you're absolutely right. It has not been confirmed, and it won't be confirmed probably until, if we're lucky, this time next year. So I take your point on that one. And with the linked to the annual appraisals, again, it's just to make sure that the annual appraisals are undertaken, but there's a period of time for which officers and the person that's heard the appraisal or undertaken the appraisal to actually fill the documentation. There's two different things here. So it could be actually that 100% of appraisals have been undertaken by the end of March, for example, but it's usually, we usually say by the end of April. But actually, until they go onto the system, we have actually no way of measuring when they were undertaken. And I think what would be helpful for you as members is a narrative around the fact that due to other work pressures, the appraisals have happened, but not necessarily that they haven't all gone on the system, and there's no other way of actually monitoring their effectiveness. So you're absolutely right. It would still be to be confirmed, but we could actually state at this point in time, this is the number that have been achieved. And here's the reason why we're behind in getting everything onto the system, as opposed to people have had their actual appraisals. So we'll certainly take that away and have a think about how we might be able to improve that.
Thank you.
Councillor Vaux.
Thanks. I'm just going to support Councillor Basham on this one. I mean, having come from a statutory sector organisation, and we were told if we didn't do our appraisals within a particular time frame, it was a disciplinary issue. So I think this is about priorities. If appraisals are a priority for the council, then by a certain month, if it's unreasonable to say that they're logged by the end of March, then okay, by the end of April. But we need to have a deadline by which they should be, because that reflects the priority that we believe that appraisals are. So there isn't slippage in it, so that people do actually do them. So I think we do need to tighten up on it somehow. That's my personal view.
Absolutely happy to take that away. I would just add in that there was an added complication throughout the period this year due to the pay and benefits review, in terms of people signing up for that discussion and wanting to be part of the conversation. So fully appreciate, we would normally expect them all to be written up and on the system by the end of May. But obviously people were in a period of flux in terms of wanting to be part of that appraisal process. So I think that going forward, actually we can tell you that it's the end of May normally that we want them written up and on the system, and they should have all been undertaken. And on a case-by-case basis, normally we may give an exception if an officer's been, prioritised another piece of work and hasn't been able to do it. But we'll certainly take away and have a look at how we can either get it onto the system more appropriately, or at least record that the appraisal's been undertaken.
Councillor Bean.
Thank you. I just want to comment on FCC 01, which is customer satisfaction with major council-owned sports facilities, accepting this is 22-23, but I believe this is in 23-24, and I would hope that we still care about customer satisfaction in 24-25 around council-owned sports facilities. Having sort of held the portfolio, and reflection's a great thing, and I think when you're on the details sometimes you may overlook things, and I think when I'm looking at this KPI now, I'm assuming it's an average of all the CSAT scores that we have across the facilities, but actually if most of our residents are going to the Aquadrome or Tadley, we should be giving greater weighting to the CSAT scores there, because actually that reflects 40% of what our residents are using. And if that's sat down at 60, 70%, it just feels like that wouldn't be truly reflected in the overall number. And I think just a kind of supplementary comment, which is an ongoing challenge that I had with the portfolio, is that we do know we have a number of issues with some of our facilities, namely the Aquadrome, and I continue to challenge, even now, not having the portfolio. Is 83% at the Aquadrome truly a fair reflection of customer satisfaction? Are we gauging customer satisfaction in the right way? Because I would argue, based on what we see across social media, etc., that actually is the figure really 83%? So it's kind of twofold. It's really challenging us in the way that we are gathering CSAT, but equally the weighting in which we're giving to that CSAT, because I'm assuming we just take all of the scores, divide it by how many we have, and there's our percentage. But that then I think is skewing perhaps some of the facilities that are holding us back, but should be like more proportionately weighted in the overall. Hopefully kind of carry the comment that I've made there.
Katie, hopefully you've made a note of that, and we can have a look at the calculation and see how it's provided and feed that back.
Councillor McIntyre, I think, was next.
Thank you. It'll just be a quick one. PEA 01 ABC and PEA 01, page 12, which is all about the increased percentage in household waste. Can I just ask how that KPI is calculated? Because is it an increase per quarter, or is it comparing each quarter against last year's target? I think what I'm trying to say is I don't understand how that percentage figure is calculated and what we're measuring it against. Thank you.
Again, we'll get a written response to you following the meeting.
Councillor Basham.
I just wanted to echo what Councillor Bean said about sports. I can't remember the exact where I saw it, but I think it might have been in the annual report, or the draft annual report. But we have a number of metrics that we score against ourselves against as a council, and we were outperforming in many of them, or there or thereabouts in a couple. But the one that we were really slipping in, I think we had 49%, and it was to do with sport and sports facilities generally. So I just wanted to echo how important that KPI was. And I just wonder whether, since some of us are new to the committee and we didn't go through the genesis of these KPIs and some of the questions that are coming up, whether we could do with sort of a glossary might help. I know it'll make the report longer, but it might obviate quite a lot of questions. I don't know.
So I think I'll pick it up with Katie offline, but what we'll try and do is, because we have obviously, as you say, previously brought through for the 23-24 ones, which we'll be looking at going forward, we did actually go through all the calculations, etc. So we should have that information that we can pull together. What I propose is actually we share that with committee members in advance of the next time we discuss indicators, and if there's anything you require clarification, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, Sue. I would just add that there is a sea of green there, and it is remarkable, and it is an overall challenging, very long, challenging list. And well done to officers, well done to the former administration, I think.
Councillor Bowes.
Thank you. ISD 01, page 12, reduction in antisocial behaviour. Just like concerned, query about how we measure that, because I know an awful lot of residents who are not bothering to report anything because they don't feel that their concerns are being addressed when they do report them. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if we could have something where they can just report it and have a moan, so that we could at least get an idea of how bad the problem is. I mean, sometimes in reporting things to the non-emergency number, they complain that they're not hearing back for days, if not weeks on occasion. So just wondering how we're measuring that, and if there is a better way that we can measure it at all going on.
So we will get a formal response for you, but my understanding is that this is not the police information in terms of their ASB complaints. This is things that our CPSOs and deal with when they're out and about. So it's that internal piece, not the actual activity that's therefore monitored by the police.
I know again sometimes there's an issue with feedback there. For example, people complaining to the CSPOs about cannabis use in local parks, for example, and I'm sure that it's being, that they are patrolling afterwards, but I'm not sure that the feedback is being heard by the residents at times. Thanks.
I just got something to add on that actually, because I did raise in the work programme meeting to get an item about ASB and getting some good scrutiny on that one, because it's something that I feel very strongly about, because I get a lot of issues around this, and I think I totally agree with you that I don't think we're getting a good enough, even if it's just the information's not coming back to us. But we need to look at that properly. Oh, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I would just pick out the excellent work that our CSPOs are doing, and in terms of the conversation and the debate, it's around the statistics, the figures, and how we measure something. I think that's one of the interesting thing with the KPIs, isn't it? We can try to find a KPI that is as tangible and direct and gives you the information you require. But it's something to reflect on, I think, after the debate this evening, which was the same debate we had last year, which was the same debate we had the year before that, and it's the debate we have every year. So I'm definitely listening to what you're saying this evening in terms of the future KPIs. Obviously 23-24 are set, 24-25 will be different, and I'm hearing what you're saying. But I would just put it on the record, the excellent work that our CSPOs do and how much we all, I know, support them.
Councillor McIntyre.
Thanks, I do apologise. I don't like the sound of my own voice. I do just want to reiterate Councillor Basham's and Harvey's thanks to the officers for the hard work that they're doing. I do have another nit to pick though. Apologies. However, this is actually it's doing you a favour, leader, because I think I'm going to make your KPIs look green next year. ISE 04, page 13. The title of the KPI is New Placements into Private Rented Sector per annum. So you obviously look at the target we're trying to achieve, which I'm assuming is greater than or equal to 64. And as you look at the quarter, it's obviously increased at the tail end. Is that because we're measuring the quarter's performance against a per annum target? Thanks.
Again, Katie, if you can take that as a question to feedback.
I think that specifically relates to obviously the greater use of the rent bond scheme. So in some ways, you're right, the green indicates the success of the scheme, and that's something that we should all celebrate, obviously. But I take the point, we can take that back to Kate, but I do think that reflects the use of the scheme and how good it's been, so to speak, to achieve the end that we've achieved there for people, getting them into accommodation using the rent bond scheme.
Any further questions? Is there any further debate? I think if that's the case, we need to I'm going to sum up. I've heard, seems to be a lot of, again, questions around the actual KPIs themselves. Particular one that came out, I think, was around how we define the RAG status, which I think is quite important, and also weightings on scores, so the actual process for this. There's some questions that have gone away. Mention of a glossary as well, and also recommendation to go to update on the workforce report, particularly around sickness, to the HR committee. I think that's about it. Okay, I think then that means we move on to the next item, which is appointment to the And are you happy to note the report? Thank you. Okay, so the next one is we go on to talk about is the performance panel, and whether we need to reconvene the performance panel. So it's kind of open to discussion. Previous members, I was on this, Andrea, Onley, Councillor Durrant and Councillor Kotecha. So would you like to reconvene the performance panel? If so, ask for the appointment of 5 councillors to the performance panel. But do we want to talk about it first?
So really, it was just to reiterate to members that obviously the performance panel is not necessarily made up of 5 members from this committee, although we do look to have the chair from this committee so that they can feed back at the next scrutiny meeting. The role of the performance panel is to undertake on behalf of the scrutiny committee the full sort of analysis and review of the indicators. What then comes back to scrutiny committee is a very high level summary. And so obviously you need to consider whether as a committee you want to be able to get into the detail of the indicators or not. Otherwise, effectively, we're duplicating the conversation. So I think what you need to consider is whether you're content that you get a feedback from a separate partially sub-panel, if you like, of this committee, or whether actually you would rather have it come here so that you can have the full debate yourselves.
I'd just like to give a bit of feedback. So actually, I was obviously being on the performance panel. One of the reasons I wanted to do it is because a lot of the questions that have come out tonight are similar questions I've had, which is around how we set the KPIs and how that's all worked through. Now, having had a chat with Sue previously, and she might like to give a little explanation of how KPIs are set, because I think that would be really useful for everybody. And I believe this is fed down through the plan and obviously operationally and what can be measured, because I think that will give a better indicator as to whether or not the performance panel actually holds any value, or whether it's actually in how we set things and how the plans work through, which I personally feel from what I've learnt in the last couple of months may be a better approach. But I'll pass over to Sue to explain how it all works.
So in normal circumstances, we would set the council plan once every 4 years. Obviously, it is sometimes updated in between, but generally speaking, the direction of travel is set for 4 years, and alongside that, a number of indicators are set. However, as you say, the indicators are almost live to some extent in terms of things change, circumstances change, and therefore there is an opportunity, even if the council plan is not updated, to update the KPIs for the following financial year. And that's normally done alongside looking at the budget process and what the proposals around any service changes, etc., and what influence they might have in terms of the indicators you therefore want to have a look at. So the process is that if you look at when a council plan is set, the priorities under the council plan are identified, the activities that are going to achieve those, the activities and actions that will achieve those council plan priorities are identified, and then the indicators that measure those actions are identified, and therefore they're all part and parcel effectively of the same decision process. Cabinet will obviously recommend the council plan to council for approval, but they also, as the executive, have the role and responsibility for effectively the ongoing daily delivery of services, so they set the KPIs. And what would normally happen is KPIs are set in February at Cabinet, and the council plan, or any changes to the council plan, are approved alongside the budget setting process at February Council. Because of the change in the council plan, obviously throughout scrutiny last year there was a significant amount of debate in terms of what those KPIs should look like. So in the first instance, officers will go away and come back with, in terms of, well, this is the actual data we can get hold of, this is what we can actually physically measure, here's our suggestions in terms of how we might be able to identify and measure those indicators. And sometimes they are accumulation of service indicators that sit in the individual service plans for each service. That is then discussed initially with Cabinet, who then may have some other further thoughts in terms of what other indicators they might want to put in or tweaks to those indicators. And again, we go through that process of explaining how the indicator is calculated, what it's trying to measure, and effectively sense checking. That then goes to scrutiny, and scrutiny are invited to comment and make any suggested changes, additions, tweaks, formatting issues. Those comments are collated, and as some of you will probably recall, we went back to council, was it 3 times? I can't remember, I think it was twice, and then with the final ones. So it went to council weren't happy with it, it came back through scrutiny. So there is an opportunity, just because you kind of make a recommendation, it will then be, the normal process would be for the leader to go through those list of recommendations with their cabinet and decide which ones they can and can't implement. And some of that will be fed back by officers in terms of, we physically have no way of capturing that, or yes, we can do that, or actually we need to make these changes. That gets fed back. I think the right process for that is for it to be fed back to scrutiny before it goes for formal approval. Whereas I think the timelines last year didn't work that well. And so it went to scrutiny, then went to council, back to scrutiny, then went back to council. So actually we would expect there to be feedback at the next scrutiny session in terms of this is the thoughts around it. And that's an iterative process until the point that the actual indicators get approved. And ultimately it's your recommendations, but it's ultimately up to the Cabinet to agree what those indicators are. You know, whether it's here or whether it's at performance panel, at every session, you know, if you're concentrating on particular indicators and you want to just look at a particular set and have a discussion that says actually what is it we're trying to measure, what are we trying to deliver, does that really tell us? That's then for you to have that debate and feed that back to Cabinet as recommendations from scrutiny. And then obviously what you would do is welcome comments back from Cabinet via the leader in terms of how that might be taken forward, and whether there is a compromise position, or whether actually, yep, that's fine, we just change the presentation, or actually that's not an indicator that we can monitor. And obviously that will culminate into a set of indicators that the Cabinet will then put forward for authorisation and approval in February.
So can you clarify where we are with the ones that are going through for this year?
So 23-24, so the current financial year's indicators were approved by Cabinet in February just gone. So they are the indicators for the current year. That's what you will see come to scrutiny panel in terms of, scrutiny committee or performance panel. Just mix that one up a little bit. And that's the ones that you will be invited to, you know, in terms of looking at the performance, but also if there are things that you think actually that might make more sense to us, or actually the indicator's fine, but we want some more narrative, or that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, can we have this? That will be then, you know, at the, whether it is committee or the next panel, but it's not just a one-off chance. It's a, you know, until the actual indicators are approved or put to Cabinet for approval, there is an opportunity to have that ongoing discussion. What I would say though is that we don't want to move too far away from the fact that the point of the indicators coming is that you actually have a look at the performance of the council as well to date against those indicators.
Any questions? Councillor McIntyre.
Yeah, I've got a question for you, Chair. Did you see value in your position on the performance panel last year?
I personally found that sitting on the performance panel meant, because the KPIs were all quite set and already in place, that there didn't seem to me to be an awful lot extra that came out of it that wasn't already addressed in scrutiny in that larger forum. So personally, as it stood, it wasn't quite what I was hoping for. I was hoping for to get underneath the KPIs. I now understand a lot more about how it's all set, which has changed my perspective. Councillor Harvey, did I see you put your hand up?
I didn't, but just to add to that, giving in mind that we've got 24-25 to come, if it was the committee's decision to have a performance panel, then that would obviously give us something to work with in that context. So I'm open to what you feel would be appropriate in the KPIs going forward. They are the council's KPIs, that's the important point. While the executive may well be given the direct responsibility of setting them, working with officers as to what we can do and can record, it's important that we have that element of accountability. So, in your hands.
So a question for Sue. So if we're having the performance panel, the terms of reference were set very much about reviewing what currently is. From what I'm hearing from Councillor Harvey is the potential to be looking at that as a more of a forward approach, to be more focused on working through on setting KPIs. Is that what you were implying?
This committee gets to review it, don't you, in terms of what you're saying. What I'm saying is, if that was how you wish to do that action, you could do it through the performance panel, or you do it through here as we did last year. It's how you do that. The point is, we have to set them as the executive because it's our responsibility to do so. And then obviously it's the responsibility of officers to advise us. I'm saying in terms of your process, it's up to you to do so, to decide how you choose then to do as Sue exactly set out. I'm not disagreeing with Sue in any way, but you have two choices, don't you? You bring it here, or you've put it into a performance panel to do a deep dive.
So I think that comes back all the way around back to my first comment, which is, are you content as a committee for a subgroup of 5 committee members who may or may not be all members of the scrutiny panel, with the chair of the performance panel feeding back to you that they've had those conversations and you're effectively relying on the performance panel to have those conversations for you? Or actually, do you want to just have the full conversation here at scrutiny? So that's kind of your choice, really.
Councillor Jones.
I think if we had it here, the only thing I would say, we need time to actually look at it. I think sometimes we overload, I was chair, so you blame me, we can overload the committees when you got these things. And I think one of the problems was that we were discussing the KPIs, and to be perfectly honest, we was going round in circles. That is why we went for the panel. But if we really want to look at it, and it sounds, we're not going to get behind the KPIs, we're going to have to see what's there and take it from there. You might as well do it here as long as you're prepared to put the time in here. But it's no good nodding it through. No disrespect to anybody sat on these tables too long, but if you nod them through, you better go to a panel so they look at it closely. But all I'd say to the chair and to the director, you know, if we are getting KPIs, we want time to actually look at them and possibly brief us before the meeting if possible.
Councillor McIntyre.
Yeah, thanks. Question for Sue. So, talking just to understand the terms of reference, if we did stand up a performance panel and they looked in depth at these KPIs, would their recommendations be to scrutiny along with the detail on what they'd looked at, or would their recommendations be to the cabinet, or is it for us as scrutiny to decide how we wanted to do that?
So what would happen is the chair of performance panel has to say who really needs to be a member of the scrutiny committee. Following performance panel, at the next scrutiny meeting, will come back and feedback on the discussions that were had at performance panel and the recommendations from performance panel to scrutiny committee to consider. And then you as scrutiny committee would decide on whether you wanted to make a recommendation from scrutiny committee to cabinet.
It's not really a question, more my musings, because I would certainly look to analyse any of these KPIs anyway, as I think everybody in this room has done in their own way. And I appreciate we are a committee, but I'm also personally reluctant to make a decision when, and as effective a chair as you've been, Councillor Disdain, when Councillor Miller isn't here to chair that. But I don't know, Councillor Jones, when you were a previous chair, would you have been happy setting your own ship, or would you have wanted to have had an opinion on the matter? Or
my view was it's how the committee runs. It's not about who's up the top table. If we weren't getting the results we wanted, and that was one of the reasons we went for the panel in the first place, was a lot of interest in it. We were talking round the table. And what we actually said at the time, if we go for a panel, when it comes back, we're not going to break it all down and go through it again. That is one of the problems we will come across if we're not careful. Because if we're going to do that, we might as well not have a panel, if you understand what. And like us all councillors, we like to stick our nose in, maybe not at the right time, but you know, think, oh my God, I've just seen that. And they've already discussed that at the panel. Now, if there's interest on the committee, we should be looking at it as a committee. If we feel we've got the time to do that. I don't know what the workload is this year. That's the bottom line.
So 2 points really. 2 points really. I think there is space there is capacity within the work programme if we want to discuss it here. There's different ways of looking at it. You could, as a committee, have the session whether that's a briefing session outside of committee or as part of committee, in terms of these are the indicators, here's how they're set, here's what they're trying to measure, have a discussion as committee, and then actually just allow the performance panel to take that forward, or you could have all the discussions here. The other point that I would make is, whilst there are 5 panel members, we did not have a panel with 5 panel members. So it's not particularly well attended, if I'm honest, or it wasn't last year. That might just been down to timing of meetings, etc. So again, you are very reliant on 5 members who don't necessarily always have the capacity to actually attend. So if you do go for a performance panel, I would strongly recommend that you do look at trying to nominate people that can actually attend and be fully participant in the actual discussions.
I was just going to add that my perspective as a new member of the committee is that I don't know how involved the discussions were last year compared to what they've been this evening. I don't know how busy the workload of scrutiny generally is or how unpredictable it is. I wouldn't want to put something on our agenda that then means that we haven't got the space to scrutinise other things we might want to scrutinise. On the other hand, I think part of the suggestion was that we defer this until Councillor Miller can decide. I think that has the same effect of allowing us to decide next time, but it also means that we're not going to convene a performance panel, which I think sounds to me like it might be the right answer anyway.
Councillor Hawkes.
I'm sorry, but I don't support waiting for Councillor Miller to come back. I don't think it's the chair's role to make a decision on that. I think it's the committee's role to make a decision on it. The chair is just helping us have a meeting.
In that case, I think we shouldn't bother with a performance panel.
Oh, just to give. Oh, sorry, Councillor McIntyre. I'll just jump in. Just from going where you said about the value, I felt, and as Sue points out, we didn't have great attendance. Obviously, that's down to individuals. Personally, with a smaller group of people that possibly aren't so involved on the scrutiny side, because they can come from different committees as well, it did feel that the conversation wasn't anywhere near as. Actually, I felt in scrutiny we did more in-depth questioning of it. The question, I think, as Councillor Jones was saying, it's about the load on the scrutiny committee itself. But personally, I felt the discussion was stronger during scrutiny meetings. From my personal opinion, we only had, I think, 3 meetings, didn't we? And to say so, and there had been a performance panel that used to meet years ago before my time, but it certainly didn't quite work as strongly as I'd hoped in that time. Carry on, sorry.
Okay, I'll give you my tuppence because I am a data man and I would put myself forward for a performance panel. So in all honesty, whether or not it's there or here, I will dig into the numbers. And what I wouldn't want to do is increase the workload on yourselves and be necessarily over finicky, but I'm not going to make any apologies when I do break it down and ask for the data. So it's whether or not the work we have space and capacity into this, because I could dive into this all day, if I'm honest with you.
Perhaps a reflection then back to committee is the item that's coming to scrutiny is the performance indicators and the performance against those indicators. That's the main item that's coming to scrutiny. If there is a process that we need to make sure that scrutiny members are keyed into, which is then actually, are they the right indicators going forward, we may be able to separate out those 2 particular activities. We just perhaps need to go away and think about how we might be able to do that. So, as you say, it doesn't take up an extraordinary amount of time within the normal committee agenda, because actually, probably you need a sort of a one-off piece of work, which is the scrutiny of what are the indicators, are they the right indicators? And then you're looking at the performance against the indicators as they're already set during the year. And there may be other things that come to mind that say, actually, do you know what, perhaps we should tweak that one, perhaps we should tweak that one. But you've already had the kind of background data in terms of how is it calculated, where are we getting our data from, what's it trying to measure, how does that link back to the council plan. So you've had that initial conversation, which might be the starting point, if you like, of the 24-25 comments. and then you're looking at actual performance against those indicators, which will help you fine tune those comments as we go through the year. But so it may well be that we can look at something which is very, whether it's a members briefing or whether it's a separate session, which is just looking at how that feeds into the ongoing process. You will need to ratify it here at Scrutiny in terms of making those recommendations to Cabinet, but we can give that some thought if that's okay with members. But that might be a way in which, because what you don't want to do is every single quarter when this paper comes is have the same conversation. You want to be able to move the conversation forward as you go throughout the year.
So I guess final point, because I absolutely get that, and in the spirit of cross-party interest as well, it might have surprised you that I would also have wanted to nominate Councillor Basham to get into it, because he really is a numbers man. So again, I'm happy to sit back and understand what his opinion would be as well, and whether or not if he was going to go into that, or just happy to sit and scrutinise, as you said with there, Sue. But I personally think the task and the role that we're talking about is important, not necessarily the construct of whatever it is that we do. And I'm happy to go with the committee for that, understanding that we are going to do that scrutiny of the numbers and the task.
Councillor Basham.
If I wasn't clear, thank you, Dave. If I wasn't clear last time, I really wasn't wanting to sign up for another panel and or committee. However, I take Councillor McIntyre's point, and I'm sure it would be a good exercise and interesting to actually try and work out how the future KPIs map to the council plan. I think it would be a useful exercise, and if people wanted to hear what we had to say and someone else wanted to come along, then so be it.
Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, I'm going to go along with the other two speakers that I'm in favour of a performance panel, definitely. Whether I can perform as good as the Councillor McIntyre and Councillor Basham's another thing, but I'm happy to join.
Councillor Ganesh.
Could I also propose Councillor Miller? So you go for.
We can check. Yeah, we can check that with him.
He's not here, but I think Councillor Miller felt as chair of Scrutiny, it would be helpful for him to be in the conversations when the papers did come here, as well as wishing to participate in it.
So it sounds like we have several members that would like to be on a performance panel. So it sounds like do we need to put a vote to see if we are going to have a performance panel first? I suppose that's the best thing. Obviously, if we've got willing volunteers, it seems a bit churlish not to, but we better do the official vote. So, is there anybody opposed to a performance panel?
I'm quite happy with the panel, but for the members, perhaps who weren't sitting here last year, if you hear what was said, we are not going to debate everything again that's being debated at that panel. Certain things may come up, but the whole thing ain't going to be rolled out, and that's the worry we had last year. And as long as everybody's agreed, I'm more than happy for someone with your expertise to be on that panel, and yours.
Okay, so based on that, we now have nominations. We have two councillors that have three. Sorry, Councillor Phillimore, Councillor Basham, Councillor McIntyre. Is there anybody else? Councillor Miller. Apologies. Anybody else from here? Or
that's fine.
That is fine.
Miller, Phillimore, McIntyre, Jones, and Basham.
Who's the other one? Sorry.
Councillor Phillimore, Councillor Miller,
Tony, I didn't say you. What, you putting me forward? Yeah. Okay, I'll come along. I don't know whether I can make the meetings. Okay.
And else we need someone to volunteer to be chair and feedback to the committee.
I would like go on.
I mean, are we allowed to recruit from outside the scrutiny committee? Because we've only got 4 at the moment. You might find that there's another councillor outside of the scrutiny committee that might want to join. I can't count. I shouldn't be on it.
I'd like to propose. Oh, sorry, I was going to say I'd like to propose that, considering Councillor Basham doesn't want too much responsibility, that maybe Councillor McIntyre would like to. I don't know if anybody else would like to nominate that.
I'd second that.
Okay, I think that's that item done. Yeah, so basically, for just to answer that, if there were any vacancies, we'd then look outside. Right, so the next thing we're going to do is a review of the work programme.
So in terms of the work programme that's before you, we held a meeting with the chair of the Scrutiny Committee, Scrutiny Overview Committees. A number of items were identified and it was agreed amongst the chairs where each of those items would go. So obviously there are other work items that potentially could come to scrutiny, which will actually be on CEP or EPH, because it's important that it goes to the right committee rather than pitching up at one or two committees and having overlap. So this was based on the items that are either something that we've previously had or interest that was shown and as appropriate to come to scrutiny committee as opposed to one of the other committees. But obviously this is a starter for 10. Even though you may approve this work programme today, it doesn't stop you adding items as we go through the year. And as already indicated, if there is a call-in for any reason, there would be an additional call-in meeting anyway, which would separately look at the call-in item, unless we just happen to have a scrutiny meeting within 5 days.
Is there any further discussion or questions on the work programme as it currently stands? Councillor Vaux.
Chair, are you looking at the task and finish group within that, or just the work programme at the moment?
Just the work programme. Councillor Basham.
I have a question about the March, must be March 24 meeting, with regards to the review discussions with housing associations. How does that, and it says to have a discussion with the housing association and other partners subject to receipt of a topic suggestion form. How does the mechanism work there? How does the topic suggestion form work? When I guess is the key.
If you want to raise a work programme item, I believe we go through Democratic Services and you'll get forwarded a form. Now that topic, that's actually something that I raised, and I have actually submitted a form to Ellie for review. So that will hopefully be circulated around. It's around service and service levels and issues and communications, etc., that we have with housing associations.
Is there an opportunity for us to add to that if we submit one of these forms, or is that now set in stone, as it were?
So no, not set in stone. We can review the work programme and you can review the activity. Obviously, clearly from an officer's point of view, we'd appreciate there's some clarity around it before we actually start preparing for the item, but there's absolutely no reason why you can't update and add things.
I just we should catch up afterwards then, because I think there's certainly my casework experience is that there's a lot to talk to our housing associations about, and this is hopefully the right committee for that.
So I think what will be useful is for you to kind of articulate the variety of things that you might wish to discuss, and then agree for this particular session what it is that you want to focus on, so that you can have a proper conversation about some key items rather than trying to have a conversation about a number of items and not really get into the detail.
Just I'll ask, I think probably Jack might be the person to answer. The work programme forms get circulated, don't they? And then we bring them here and look at them, and then we would decide and agree on them. And obviously amendments could be made to them to add on bits. Which is where's this bit down? Okay, we move on to, oh, I see, current and planned review groups, because I can see the word task and finish there, yeah. So, yes, if you want to have a look at that, and anybody got any comments or questions on this? Apologies, Councillor Hawkes.
Thank you. Just the group that is there. Councillor Frost is no longer with us. I just wondered whether the committee was happy for it to continue with that adjusted group, or whether they wish to review the group.
So the committee isn't necessarily agreeing the members that are on the task and finish group. They're agreeing the item for a task and finish. Invitations were then sent out in terms of anyone that wished to nominate themselves to be part of the task and finish group. So if there are other people that wish to put themselves forward, obviously that can be added and accepted by the committee. So yes, so Councillor Frost can come off, and if anybody either within the panel or outside of the outside the committee wishes to be involved in it, they can be. But these were the particular. What I think we asked was for group leaders to put some nominations forward, and I think this is what came back to yourself, wasn't it, Paul? In terms of these are the people that came forward.
Councillor Harvey?
Two things to note. Firstly, I think you're right. Obviously, Councillor Frost is no longer a councillor in that sense, but also myself, Councillor Cubitt and Councillor James are all on executive now. And in terms of that, there is a discussion to be had about whether or not a scrutiny task and finish panel should include us. I don't believe it should. So that's my first point. In terms of the task and finish panel, it was set up prior, obviously, to the elections. The first meeting was held in January, and then scrutiny approved the actual shape and form of the terms of reference at the final meeting of the year before it went into PERDA. So question really is there a purpose to the task and finish panel in the first place, given the fact of where it sits? If that's a decision you come to, then you would need to find, I think, members to supplement potentially the 4 remaining members that sit on that are not members of the executive. And again, if that's a balance to have with the members of other groups, because I'm noting Councillor Compton-Burnett and Councillor McIntyre are on that, yourself, Councillor Sustain, and Councillor Slimming. So logically, if the independent group nominates a member to join that, you then have a balanced panel to continue to consider the terms of reference that were previously set.
Any thoughts? Councillor Basham?
I hear what you're saying about cabinet members. I'm concerned that we keep some continuity on there though. But I don't know how close to the finish of the task and finish group you are, I guess is the key question, or is it still quite early?
Councillor Harvey?
Quite simply because of the election and then the outcome of the elections, that changes things. So in the sense, I don't think you can have cabinet members sitting on a task and finish panel. They can't have that. It's just, that's not right. They cannot mark their own homework in that regard. Of course, when we set this up and with the intention, of course, we were not cabinet members at that time. And we were seeking to do a piece of work working with the then cabinet member for housing and homes and regeneration. So I think you need to decide as a new committee in a new environment, in a new position, do you want this? If you want this, you've agreed it in March anyway, so you've already got the terms of reference. It's the membership of it, perhaps, that you're discussing, but that's for you to decide. This is your panel, not ours, and the executive should have no part of it other than supporting you.
Councillor McIntyre?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So I was a nominated councillor for it. Unfortunately, I was skiing, and it was a preordained date when Councillor Harvey stood up the first group. I personally would be happy to continue on this. It is a matter that's raised with me on a semi-regular basis within my ward about the housing register. However, I do appreciate it's a new administration. They need to be given the time to find their feet and work through their policies. But I certainly think there's nothing there that's necessarily a negative effort in working with the new portfolio holder for that. So I would be happy to continue with it, and happy to accept Councillor Harvey's recommendation that a member of the independent group join, if everybody else is still happy to sit in this group.
Councillor Bound.
What is a task and finish group, please? Because I think everybody else has been here. I have no idea what it does, what it is.
So, in terms of if items come up at scrutiny where members feel that they would like further information, the idea is that you set a definitive task, if you like, in terms of we'd like to find out some more information about this, and this is the outcomes that we would like to achieve from that task and finish group, and there is a definitive date by which that activity is finished. Otherwise, it just goes on. It goes on forever. So it's you identify something specifically you want to look at, want to scrutinise. Why are you wanting to scrutinise it? What are you trying to get out of it? And then you have a timeline and a list of activities around it that then actually bring back some recommendations to the scrutiny committee. And just to be really clear, it's members, and they can call in officers to help in terms of giving key information, etc. In terms of doing this. But generally speaking, this is a member-led group. In terms of wanting to do a piece of work to specifically look at and perhaps work with partners in terms of wanting to improve a specific element of service within the organisation.
I can give a little bit of background on this one. This is obviously the housing allocation is how we work. Registered providers actually refers to mainly housing associations. That's what that means. And this is all about how we manage to get people into properties. Is the housing allocation working properly? Have we got the policy right? So it was all about having a good examination of that to make sure that that's a very specific part of how Basingstoke Council works with the housing associations to maximise the best benefit. Also with the sort of the overriding perspective on how this then fits with planning for the future. So that was kind of like the underlying rationale behind this, if that helps. Councillor Jones.
I'd like to go on this if my name isn't already on it. I haven't sat anything on the same.
Is there anybody else that would like to go on? Because at the moment we'd have Councillor Phillimore. Can we have a chair? I'm happy to continue doing this actually because this is very close to my heart. Councillor McIntyre.
So I'd be quite happy to nominate you as the chair if you're interested in taking the chair of this task. And this isn't me increasing your workload, because obviously I appreciate it as an increase in your workload. This is more respect to your position and your experience as a councillor, and I think this is an important topic and it doesn't need political games.
Thank you very much. So looking at the list, let's just make sure who we've got on here. So we would have Councillor Jones, Councillor Phillimore, myself, Councillor McIntyre. You were. Was there anybody else? Have we got Councillor Slimin?
Councillor Compton Burnett.
And Councillor Compton Burnett, yes. We'll have to check with her. She still wants to be on it. And Councillor Slimin as well. She's not a cabinet member, that's right. Okay. I think, was there anybody else that wanted to be on that? Councillor Harvey.
Can I just say, obviously, in terms of Councillor McIntyre's comment about priorities and direction of travel and such, obviously it's a priority for us. So in that sense, having a discussion with you is relevant, and you may well find that a number of these things are coming through anyway. But the context is having a conversation with you and working with you on that. So that's, for our perspective, important. So thank you.
Okay, everybody. I think so. The last item, exclusion of the press and public. So there is nothing, I believe, on the agenda that we need to have excluded. And then item 10, there isn't anything on there. So I think that means the meeting is closed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for bearing with me as I stumbled through that.